Hey there, Bear Club! At the Mama Bear Initiative, we explore how to protect ourselves so we can protect our cubs, the people who depend on us. Join us and get the confidence you need to stay safe, make good choices, and protect yourself and those you care about. Let's go!
Okay, so we are going to record for our third time how to say no. This is a podcast that we feel very strongly about. We came across a video of a young man who was talking about a situation that he got himself into when he started college. He was befriended by an upperclassman, a male, who took him places, did things with him, but eventually it would seem as if this other person was grooming this young man to accept homosexual sexual advances from him, even though the young man's not homosexual. And he found himself in bed with this person and doing things that he would never say yes to, but he couldn't say no. And, I think our motherly hearts were breaking for this young man.
Yes.
We kind of wanted to grab him and say, why didn't you say no?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Obviously, post-incident, that's not very helpful.
Right.
However, here we are making a podcast about no. Why say no? What does saying no mean? And most importantly, how to say no. Because we can come up with all the reasons in the world why we should say no, but then when the moment comes, we may not actually do it.
Right.
So it's really important to, find the gumption and the energy to say no. Like in our last podcast, we talked about anger and how that's based on a sense of justice. So that same energy can be applied to the situation if we needed to say no to something. So we're going to start with the first question. Why say no? What is the point of saying no? You obviously can't say yes to everything.
That's right.
So what are some of the reasons why we need to say no?
I think one of the main reasons is because we need boundaries. We need to realize that we're worth protecting, figure out what that means, and then say, all right, these are my boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Right. So setting up boundaries is part of saying no, but there must be some reasons why we need to say no. For example, the fact that we have free will is one of those reasons. We are able to choose. That's what having free will means, right? So if we're able to choose, we should be able to say no to things that we don't like or don't want in our lives, right?
Yeah.
Right. So what does having free will even mean?
It means being able to decide what you want to do when, if you want to do something that someone else asks you to do or invites you to do. And it doesn't have to necessarily be good or bad, just you don't want to for whatever reason, or you do, but you make that decision for yourself.
Right.
Yeah, I have a choice.
Right. I have a choice. I can say yes. I can say no. I can
Right.
do what I want with who I want and when I want to, or not.
Yeah, and I think a huge element of free will is also I choose the results as well. So if I want a good result, I want to make sure I choose wisely.
Right. So now we're talking about consequences.
Right.
Like if I say yes to something, I'm also saying yes to whatever comes from that choice, right?
Right.
For good or for bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything in your life that you said yes to that you regretted later, or something you said no to that you didn't regret later?
I would say that saying yes to marrying the person I was married to for 7 years was probably the best and worst example of the question, because there was nothing but turmoil the entire time, and I was not in a good place when it happened, emotionally, mentally, and I said yes to marrying him, and it was a huge mistake all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
He was a narcissist, mentally, emotionally abusive, manipulative, all that, and I knew that to some degree, but I still said yes because I was desperate. And I definitely came to regret that decision.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we're now divorced for almost seven years. Well, we've been separated for 7, divorced for about 3 or 4. But yeah, that was a big mistake.
Right.
When my second daughter was in 7th grade, we were approached by a lady in swim class who had a son who was her age. And she said, you know, we're going to be putting together this science group, and we're going to be part of a competition. If we get into the top, I think 5 or 6, we'll be able to get a free trip to Disney World. It'll be a great experience for the kids. And oh, she sold it really, really well. And I had some misgivings at first. I didn't really know this lady very well, but she was also a very good salesperson. And I asked my daughter, do you want to do this? She's like, yeah, that sounds like fun, because she really likes science. There didn't seem to be any downside.
Right.
But over the months of being involved in this science project, little by little, and here was the tricky part, it was incremental. Little by little, this lady became more and more controlling of the project. What the kids were doing, and there were 3 of them, my daughter and her son, and then another lady's son. Oh no, that's not good enough. You need to do it like this. And, you know, I understood a certain degree of, structure around it. Okay, yeah, that sounds reasonable. But little by little, it became her project.
Right.
Anything less than like a college level paper, I was like, what do you expect from 7th graders?
Right.
Seriously?
And yeah, they made it all the way to Florida. We went to Florida. The kids were extremely stressed. I was stressed. This lady was full on controlling at that point and just so determined to win. And we would talk like, what do we do if we win? We're going to be stuck implementing this program that we will have won money for like the next year. Well, guess what? We won.
Oh, no.
Oh, geez.
And everybody's like celebrating, and we're looking at each other like, oh, crap. And then guess what happened? Some little thing happened, and she cut my daughter and the other lady's son out of the project and replaced them with 2 other kids.
Oh, man.
Jeez.
And we finally contacted the people who had run the program to let them know what happened. But it was too late. The
Yeah.
damage had been done.
Yeah, that definitely is a choice. You made a choice, but it turned out to be kind of crappy
It was.
for you and everybody else. Yeah. So, the point is that we have options and we can choose our options, but we also choose what comes after.
Right.
Now, part of the consequences, choosing one thing or another, has to do with our values,
Right.
which we mentioned in the anger episode. We talked about societal, cultural, familial, and personal morals,
Right.
right? And values and morals are pretty similar.
Yeah, pretty much synonyms.
But values, the things that we hold dear, really help us to decide what we want to choose, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I think, Rochelle, you've mentioned that you value sobriety,
Yes.
right? So that will cause you to say yes or no to circumstance where there's alcohol involved.
Right.
Like if you go to a party, let's say, and there's alcohol around, your values will help you to choose no, right?
Yep. Yes.
You're also free to choose yes, right? And if you decide to discard your values for the day and decide to have something to drink, something alcoholic, you're going to choose whatever happens from drinking the alcohol.
Right.
And if you're a teetotaler, that's probably going to impact you pretty heavily physically.
Right.
You're probably going to feel inebriated fast and probably pretty hungover the next day.
Right.
And that's yours to choose if you want that. A lot of people choose that sort of thing.
Yeah, they make plans for it.
Right. Yeah. A lot of people make plans to get drunk and whatnot over
Yeah.
the weekend. That's
off
all they've
work.
got going on.
Yep.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's not for me necessarily to judge whether that's necessarily good or bad for someone else. I have to decide whether or not that's good for me. Right? And something I really don't appreciate is being pressured to say yes to something that I would normally say no to.
Right.
When someone's like, oh, come on, it's just this one time. What if this one time turns into 10 times?
Yeah.
What if I become an addict because I said yes once to drugs,
Right.
which has happened to people. So,
Yeah.
you know, one of the reasons we want to say no is we want to avoid the consequences of any of our yeses.
Right.
Right.
And we make those no's and yeses based on our values because we have free will.
Right. The whole idea of not compromising,
Right. Not
Um,
compromising.
which is, part and parcel of having good, strong boundaries.
Right.
This is where I stand firm. Over here, I might be a little squishy, but this is my bottom line.
Right. Which brings us to the next question. What does saying no mean? We're talking about boundaries. So, Evelyn, why don't you explain to our audience what a boundary is?
Sure. A boundary is basically the outward description of this is what I've decided what I'm going to do. This is what I've decided I'm not going to do. And this is my line. This is my line in the sand, like they say.
Right.
So the idea of deciding in advance and establishing that.
Mm-hmm. Right. So setting up boundaries means that you're telling other people what you will and won't accept from them.
Right.
Right,
What you will and won't say yes to.
right,
Right. And we need those boundaries because if we don't have any boundaries with anyone, then we'll just willy-nilly give in to anything and let people treat us whatever way they want.
yes.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that is an awful place to be in.
Yeah, because you're basically making yourself a slave to other people's whims.
Yeah,
Yep.
You're becoming codependent with them. You're allowing yourself to be swayed by their every whim. And you kind of stop existing as a person.
right.
Yeah, that's true.
You just become a thing that other people are using.
And then there's that pressure to continue in that because they're benefiting from it.
Right.
So, and then, feeding into that codependency, I don't want to get them upset. I don't want to lose the relationship. So I'm going to just go with them. But speaking from experience, it's an awful way to live. You get jerked this way and that way. You don't know where you end and the next person begins.
Right. Yeah. I personally despise codependency. I find myself sometimes acting codependently with people, and then I'm like, what am I even doing?
Right.
So
How did I get here?
Yeah. So just real quick, what do you mean by codependent?
Well, codependent behavior, I think you mentioned it, is at least initially starting with trying to make sure that the other person is okay,
Mm-hmm.
so they're not upset with you.
Yep, that's it.
So you'll do things and you'll say things to appease the other person, to keep them happy. You'll enable behaviors so that things are as copacetic as you can get them to maintain a homeostasis, which
Right.
means maintaining a balance in the environment.
Even if it's an unhealthy balance, at least it's steady, it's predictable.
Right.
Yeah.
However, that makes you, as I said earlier, a slave to the other person's whims.
Yes.
You become their source of comfort and other things that you're not supposed to necessarily be.
Right, so that's essentially the opposite of what we want. That's the opposite of saying no. That's the opposite of, I know you want me to do this, but I'm not going to be available. Or I
Right.
don't want to do that. Or Rochelle, no thank you, I'll have a soda.
Right. We're not supposed to become double-headed monsters with other people. We're supposed to be independent people who exist separately, who have agreed independently to be together to do this thing,
Right.
Yeah.
right? So if that's not happening, that means you become entangled with someone and you've lost all sense of boundaries between you and this other person, even in the closest relationship of marriage.
Right.
Right.
That's actually the worst form of codependent behavior, is what happens in a marriage. It becomes abusive, it becomes controlling and manipulative, because I've seen where the person who is being enabled rages and abuses and manipulates their enabler to get what they want,
Yes.
right? And that just feeds, it's like a feedback loop. It just keeps feeding on itself and it keeps everybody trapped.
Yes.
So,
Until someone finally stands up and says, no more. I
Right.
will not put up with this anymore.
right.
I might be speaking a little strongly because I'm speaking from experience. I'm one of those marriages you saw.
Right.
Mine is, I should say.
Right. So, we're talking about the need for boundaries. We have to set them up,
Yeah.
right? We have to decide with our free will and our values and our knowledge of consequences what boundaries we actually want,
Right.
Yeah.
right? So we have to actually spend time thinking about that, or going to therapy.
Right.
When I finally realized my marriage was going to end, it was 2 weeks before it actually ended. I just knew at that point where it was headed. I didn't expect the reason it ended, but I felt it coming to an end. And I basically told my ex-husband, whatever you decide to do with this particular thing, if you decide to do it, you can't stay here. We're not staying together. Because he essentially
Mhm.
broke a vow. And that was probably one of the first times I'd ever actually done something like that. Like actually stood up for myself and said no. And it come to the point where
Yeah,
it was
good
just,
for
it was
you.
at the end. There was no going back at that point.
Yeah.
And he decided to leave.
Right.
And enforcing the boundary was difficult but necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And it really came down to a matter of safety for a child that was our house and him being exposed to whatever my ex-husband wanted to do.
Right.
Which I didn't have to make the final decision, but I made the decision to tell him, you either have to stay here and work on the marriage or go do this other thing you decided you want to do. And that ended it.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
it came down to that. I spent 5 years just drifting and being used, basically, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally
Mm.
realized about 2 years prior to our marriage ending, enough was enough.
Right.
Right.
And then we started fighting a lot.
Now,
Yeah.
in your case, you set up a boundary
Right.
with your ex-husband, but divorce helped you maintain that,
Right.
which is the next part, right? You
Yeah.
have to maintain the boundaries, which involves enforcing consequences, because boundaries are meaningless if there isn't some consequence to crossing a boundary.
Yeah, one of the examples I think about for that is, it's like a policeman standing on the corner on a busy street and yelling at people as they're driving past, as they're like speeding.
Mm-hmm.
He can say, "You're gonna get arrested. You're gonna get a speeding ticket."
Right?
But is he enforcing? He can't. He hasn't positioned himself so that he can enforce it. However, if he's parked by the side, as they often do with the radar, and he goes and pulls him over,
Yeah.
he can enforce. So the idea of making sure that it's not just empty threats or empty, this is where I end, and then letting them step right over that line.
Right.
Right. Yeah, you can yell and scream about your boundaries all day, but if you're not willing to actually do the consequence, your boundary is pointless.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
And, you know, what Evelyn was saying about, like a policeman, like in our town, there's one spot in particular where they set up, you know, their radar and sit by the side of the road. And to get the people over, the cop steps out, points at the car, and points over there. So they know you over here,
Yeah.
right? And then the person gets the ticket. And the ticket is the consequence.
Right.
The boundary is the speed limit.
Mm-hmm.
The ticket is the consequence, right? So let's talk about enforcing consequences. What does that even mean, Rochelle?
Enforcing a consequence means someone has crossed your boundary and now you have to do the thing you said you would do when they crossed it. Like telling my ex-husband, if you decide to do this thing, you have to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And then he left and then we got divorced.
Well, what would it have meant if he didn't leave? What if he refused to leave? What would you have had to do?
Well, I would have expected him to work on our marriage and not do the thing he wanted to do.
Right, but what I'm asking you is if he refused to leave and refused to work on it, and you had to
Yeah.
enforce your boundary, what would you have done? What sorts of things could you do?
Good question. I don't really know the answer to that question, to be honest with you.
I mean, it could come down to calling the cops.
Yeah,
You know?
you could.
Or getting Big Brother Fran to come and
Right,
Yeah.
you could move the stuff out of the house, change the locks.
Right.
Mhm.
You could force him out, is what
Right.
what I'm saying. In
Yeah.
some way or fashion, you could, you know, there's probably at least 3 things that you could do if he refused to acknowledge. But the point is, it's the enforcing
Right.
Yeah.
that matters. If you say, well, you either have to get your act together and make this marriage work or leave, and he refuses to do either,
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
you have to say something like, well, if you don't do either thing, I'm going to throw you out.
Right.
Or I'm going to move out. Right? That's a consequence to a boundary.
Right.
And if we're going to say we're going to do it, we have to be willing to do it.
Right.
Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes, right? That energy from anger,
Right.
getting that
That-
sense of justice.
That justice. I
Yeah,
see it coming
referring back to
around.
our
Yep.
other episode again.
Gives us that energy.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because if somebody's crossing your boundaries, that should make you angry.
Right.
Yeah.
Establish the boundary and they just disregard it. Yeah. Should make
Yeah,
sense.
that should make you angry and willing to follow through.
I think that was a big thing for me because basically I had very few boundaries with my husband or my kids. And then, I don't know, I was just tired of the way things were. So then it was setting a boundary, which everyone was like, what the heck what is she doing, you know?
Right.
And then I realized when they started to try to treat me the way they used to treat me, oh no. Because I knew I could stand up, because I had a plan, because I already had the plan to, as I mentioned in the last episode, like the hang up, to walk away, to I don't have to stand here and take this.
Right.
And honestly, a consequence to me was them treating me badly. Was it worth it? Definitely.
Yeah, it's definitely worth enforcing your consequences if you set up, maintain reasonable boundaries
Yeah.
for other people.
It's a matter of self-respect.
Right. Hey there, Bear Club. Thanks for joining us today on this podcast about saying no to people who are crossing our boundaries. If you'd like to support our work, you can find us on Patreon and join one of our 2 membership tiers for exclusive content. You can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. Now back to the show. So we've been talking about why say no. We covered free will, values, and consequences, how they play into our reasons for saying no.
Yep.
That we have the will to choose. We have values to help us to choose.
Mm-hmm.
And part of our values is deciding whether or not we want the consequences of saying yes or no to something.
Right.
We've also spent a bit of time on what does saying no even mean. Like, if we say no, what happens. And so we've covered setting up, maintaining, and enforcing boundaries, enforcing the consequences of boundaries. So that brings us to our final piece, which is how to say no. Because we can sit here and talk about this till we're blue in the face, but if we're not even willing to go there, this whole exercise is pointless.
Yeah.
So we have to know how to say no to someone. How do you get those 2 letters out of your mouth in that order when
That's
faced
true.
with a situation? Like,
Yeah.
I've had several instances in my life where something would happen with someone that I found very uncomfortable. They seemed totally fine with it. It was totally normal for them, but I was not at all happy about like giving hugs to people I don't even like, for example.
Right.
Then in certain situations I have to try to be at least cordial with, but I don't really want to give that person a hug, but they, I guess, think things are fine between us or something, or they just give out hugs. And I find myself hugging this person, and later I'm going, why did I do that?
Yeah.
Why did I give in to this instead of saying, no, thank you?
Yeah.
Right? Because I have that option. I don't have to hug the person. I can say no.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing that really gets in the way is fear.
Yes.
Yes.
How will they react? They're going to think I'm weird. They're going to, it's going to be weird between us. So I'll just go along with.
And I think that's a form of codependency too.
Right. Going along to get along
Oh,
is a
man.
codependent
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess in that instance, I am behaving codependently with, even if it's
There it
briefly,
is. There it is again.
with people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good job, me.
Yeah. Well, you're not the only one.
I'm sure I'm not.
Fear. That's a huge thing.
Right.
We don't want to rock the boat. There again, going back to that keeping things at homeostasis.
Mm-hmm.
Because as I'd mentioned about having negative consequences, I'm still estranged from many of my family members because I started to set a boundary. But on the other hand, those who actually care, those who respect me, true friends,
Mm-hmm.
they're pleased to see the growth. They're pleased to see, oh, look,
Yeah.
good job, you go, girl,
Right.
And I think we need that. We need to realize that our saying no, just saying no, we say how to say no. Sometimes it's just no, thank you.
Right. I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind when we're figuring out how to say no, again, is that anger piece, like that sense of justice.
Yeah.
Like, this person is trying to get me to do something they want me to do, and I don't want to do it.
Right.
And so finding a sense of justice for yourself and your boundaries is really important to finding the will and the energy to say no.
Right. Or even to just not engage.
Or not
I
engage.
used to go to basically every argument I was invited to. Saying no to myself was in a fashion. Saying no to them. I still remember when this one guy was raging at me, and I just stood there and looked at him. And then he got mad at me for not engaging. So,
Darned if you do and darned if you don't.
Yeah, very much.
but yeah, just nope, not going to go there.
Right. So the sense of justice, the idea that you are worth protecting from harm,
Yes.
that you're worth protecting from consequences, the consequences you don't want. I think that's really important to establish within yourself, to decide on what your values are, to decide on what consequences of your free will you do and don't want.
Right.
I think the first thing that people need to do is to really spend some time with figuring out what their values are.
Yeah.
I think that's really the first step.
Yeah, definitely.
That's foundational.
Yeah. And then decide on your boundaries based on your values,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then decide that in the moment you're going to accept whatever the response is,
Right.
whether it's an angry response or, you know, any kind of response really, that you'll accept from that other person, whatever they do, if you say no. Because I
Yeah.
think that's the key.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've said that a lot.
To be able
Keys.
to have that acceptance of, I've done my best, I've set my boundary, now I accept whatever they decide to do.
Right. Because a lot of people don't like you to set boundaries. I know I've experienced boundaries from other people, and my initial response is, how dare you?
Yeah, I don't like
Right.
that. Feels constricting.
How dare you say that to me?
I want to do what I want.
Right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if I want people to respect my boundaries, I also need to be able to respect other people's boundaries, right?
Yeah, comes down to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that, you know, it can feel kind of bad on the receiving end of a boundary. A lot of times, especially if the relationship has codependency in it, if someone starts setting boundaries, the other person will rage
Right.
and manipulate. And
Yeah.
that in and of itself can be scary and overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But you have to keep saying no. Like if you have a 3-year-old who's strong-willed, who wants that cookie, right? And they keep going after it, you have to be willing to keep saying no,
Right.
because you know that the cookie's not good for them. But if you give in, what are you doing?
Teaching them that they can have whatever they want, or they can just walk all over you.
And that no means nothing if you say no but then give in.
Right.
Or that they can manipulate. Now you're setting yourself up to be manipulated.
Right.
You're saying that's okay.
Right. Right. And again, this comes back to a sense of justice, a sense of anger,
Mm-hmm.
a sense of protection,
Mm-hmm.
being willing to put up with whatever happens, and being willing to see things through to their logical conclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've reached about 37 minutes. And yeah, I think we can wrap this one up.
Yeah.
I think
Sounds
we've
good. Wrap it up. Stick a bow on
beat
it.
this one until it's dead. I think we've said all we could say.
Yeah, I agree.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast today on saying no, why say no, what does it mean to say no, and how to say no. We hope that you'll join us next time on the Mama Bear Initiative podcast.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks so much for joining us as we discussed such an important topic. We hope you got some food for thought and encouragement to keep going and keep growing. See you later, Bear Club.
Remember to join the Bear Club on our Patreon page for exclusive content. The link is in the description. You'll find our podcast on Google, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.